and welcome to Off the Shelf, and I'm going to read what's left of Chapter 1 from Resident Evil 0 Hour. Enjoy. A clipboard was on top of a handful of files. An official-looking document attached to it. There was a small headshot in the upper left corner of a handsome, dark-eyed young man in civvies. Neither of the corpses looked like him. Rebecca lifted it out, reading silently. Then her mouth went dry. "Captain," she managed, standing. Enrico looked up from where he was crouched next to the jeep. What happened?" She read the pertinent parts aloud. "Court order for transportation. Prisoner William Cohen, ex-lieutenant, 26 years old, court-martialed and sentenced to death July 22nd. Prisoner is to be transferred to the Ragathon base for execution." The lieutenant had been convicted of first-degree murder. Edward pulled the clipboard from her hand, saying what was already formulating in Rebecca's mind, his voice heavy with anger. "Those poor soldiers! They were just doing their jobs, and that scum murdered them and escaped." Enrico took the clipboard away from him, scanning it quickly. "All right, everyone, change of plan. We may have an escaped killer on our hands. Let's separate and survey the immediate area. See if we can't locate Lieutenant Billy. Keep your guard up and report back in 15 minutes, regardless." There were nods all around. Rebecca took a deep breath as the others started to move out, checking her watch, determined to be as professional as anyone else on the team. 15 minutes alone, no big deal. What could happen in 15 minutes? Alone, in the dark, dark woods. "Got your radio?" Rebecca jumped and turned at the sound of Edward's voice. The big man standing directly behind her. The mechanic patted her on the shoulder, smiling. "Easy, kiddo." Rebecca smiled at him. Though she despised being called kiddo, Edward was only 26 for God's sake. She tapped the unit on her belt. "Check." Edward nodded, stepping away. His message was clear and reassuring. She wasn't really alone. Not as long as she had her radio. She looked around that several of the others were already out of sight. Kevin, still in the pilot seat, was going through the briefcase that she'd found. He saw her and snapped her a salute. Rebecca gave him a thumbs up and squared her shoulders, drawing her weapon once more and heading out into the night. Overhead, thunder rumbled. Sorry, I was thirsty. Albert Wesker sat in the treatment plant's Con B1. The room dark except for the flicker from a bank of observation monitors, 6 of them, each changing view on 5-second rotations. There were shots from every level of the training facility. The upper and lower floors of the factory and water treatment plant, and the tunnel that connected the two. He gazed at the soundless black and white screens without really looking at them. Most of his attention was focused on the incoming transmission from the cleanup crew. The 3-man team, well, 2 and a pilot, was en route by copter and mostly silent. They were professionals, after all, not given to macho banter or juvenile jokes, which meant Wesker was hearing a lot of static. That was all right. The white noise went well with the blank and staring faces he saw on the monitors. The ravaged bodies slumped in corners. The men who had been infected, shambling aimlessly through empty corridors. Like the Arklay mansion and labs only a few miles away. White Umbrella's private training grounds and connected facilities had been hit by the virus. "ETA, 30 minutes, over," the pilot said, his voice crackling through the dimly lit room. Wesker leaned in. "Copy that." Silence again. There was no need to talk about what... Oh, sorry. Well, sorry about that. Silence again. There was no need to talk about what would happen when they reached the train. And through the channel was scrambled. It was best not to say more than necessary. Anyway, Umbrella had been built on a foundation of secrecy, a characteristic of the pharmaceutical giant that was still honored by everyone in the upper echelons of management. Even in the company's legitimate dealings, the less said the better. It's all coming down, Wesker thought idly. Watching the screen, Spencer's mansion and the surrounding labs had gone down in the middle of May. White Umbrella's take on it had been accidental. The lab locked down until the infected researchers and staff became ineffective. Mistakes happened after all, but the training facility nightmare that was still playing out in front of him had followed not a month later, but only a few hours ago. The engineer of Umbrella's private train, the Ecliptic Express, had pushed the biohazard panic button. So, the lockdown didn't work. The virus leaked and spread. It's that simple, isn't it? There were a handful of infected grunts in the training facility's dining room. One of them walking in looping circles around the once handsome table. He was leaking some viscous fluid out of a nasty head wound as he staggered along, oblivious to his whereabouts, to pain, to everything. Wesker tapped at the control panel beneath the monitor, keeping the surveillance from moving to the next picture. He sat back in his chair, watching the doomed walker as he circled the table yet again. Sabotage, maybe, he said softly. He couldn't be sure. It was set up to look natural. A spill at the Arclay lab, an incomplete breakdown. A few weeks later, a couple of missing hikers, likely caused by an escaped test subject or two. And a few weeks more, infection at a second White Umbrella facility. It was highly improbable that one of the virus carriers would just happen to blunder their way to one of Raccoon's other labs, but it was possible. Except now there was the train to consider, and it didn't feel like an accident. It felt planned. Hell, I might have done it myself, if I'd thought of it. He'd been looking for a way out for some time now, tired of working for people who were obviously his inferiors, and well aware that too much time on White Umbrella's payroll wasn't good for the health. Now they wanted him to lead the stars into the Arclay mansion and labs, to find out just how well Umbrella's war pets fared against armed soldiers. Did they give a shit if he died in the process? Not so long as he recorded the data first. He was sure. Researchers, doctors, techs, anyone who worked for White Umbrella for more than a decade or two had a habit of winding up missing, or dead eventually. George Trevor and his family, Dr. Marcus, Dees, Dr. Darius, Alexander Ashford, and those were just some of the bigger names. God only knew how many of the little people had ended up in shallow graves somewhere, or just turned up as test subjects A, B, and C. The corner of Wesker's mouth twitched. Come to think of it, he had a fairly good idea of how many he'd been working for White Umbrella. He'd been working for White Umbrella since the late 70s, most of that in the Raccoon area, and had watched the docs run through quite a few test subjects. Many he had helped procure himself. It was well past his time to get out, and if he could get the data the big boys wanted, he might just be able to throw himself a little bidding war going away present to fund his retirement. White Umbrella wasn't the only group interested in bioweapons research. But first a cleanup for the train and this place, he thought, watching as the soldier with the head wound tripped over a chair leg and went down hard. The training facility was connected to the private water treatment plant by an underground tunnel. It would all have to be cleared. A few seconds passed, and the soldier on screen staggered to his feet again, continuing on his mindless quest nowhere. And now there appeared to be a dinner fork sticking out of his upper right shoulder, a little souvenir from his fall. The soldier didn't notice the charming little disease. It had been the same kind as seen at the Arklay labs. Wesker was sure the last few desperate phone calls from the quarantine lab had painted a vivid picture of how effective the T virus really was. That would have to be cleaned up too. But not until after he got the stars out there for a little training exercise. It would be an interesting match. The stars were good. He'd handpicked half of them himself, but they'd never seen anything like the T virus. The dying soldier on the screen was a prime example. Hot with the recombinant virus, he went on with his endless tour of the dining room, slow and mostly brainless. He also felt no pain, and he would attack anyone or anything that happened across his path with no hesitation. The virus continually seeking new hosts to infect. Although the original spill was allegedly airborne, after this long, the virus would only be spread by bodily fluids, by blood, or, say, a bite, and the soldier was just a man after all. The T virus worked on all manners of living tissue, and there was a number of other animals to see in action, from laboratory triumphs to local wildlife. Enrico should have the Bravos out by now, searching for the latest missing hikers. But it was doubtful they'd find anything where he was planning to look. Sometime soon, Wesker would see about organizing an Alpha Bravo campout at the deserted Spencer mansion. Then he'd wipe out the evidence and be on his merry, wealthy way. To hell with White Umbrella. To hell with his life as a double agent, playing with the petty lives of men and women he didn't give a shit about. The dying man on screen fell down once again, dragged himself to his feet, and soldiered on. "Go for the gold, baby," Wesker said and chuckled, the sound echoing out through the empty dark. Well, I'm going to read what's left of this chapter some other time. I'll see you later. End.